Hello and welcome to the Core Reports Weekend Edition. We've all been reading or hearing about Tata Trusts, the company or the institution that holds about 66% of Tata Sons, which in turn holds shares in many companies that we're all familiar with, household brands ranging from Tata Motors to Indian Hotels to Tata Steel and so on. Now, there have been fissures on the board of Tata Trust for some time now, and that has come out in the open. The question really we are asking today is first to understand why is this important? Why is what is going on at a trust or a trust something that controls something that which in turn controls companies that are listed in which maybe some of us have stakes? Why is this important? Secondly, what's going on in these trusts right now that should be of material relevance to those who are watching it from outside, if at all? And thirdly, what does this mean in terms of the governance structure of Indian companies or Indian organizations, and whether this holding company format, which we are seeing in this case or play out in this case, is right for the present and the future. So that's really the three questions that we want to address with Shriram, Subramanian and Hetal, Dalal. Thank you both for joining me. So Hetal, let me start with you. Firstly, if you were to explain to someone who does not know what's been going on so far, because most of it is really removed a few layers from what could be, let's say, seen at a board level of a company. How would you, what would you be, how would you explain that?
If you look at, I think first to understand the nature of the beast, you have to understand essentially the way the structure works. So essentially, the Tata Group has a fundamental foundation in philanthropy. The trusts are the share ultimate shareholders, so to speak, of the group. But at the point in time that the trust was set up, the regulation didn't allow trusts to hold equity in listed companies. So therefore, they created a layer of Tata Sons, which was a private company which held equity in the listed companies. And that by creating this layer of Tata Sons, they essentially were able to navigate the regulatory requirements and therefore build this entire group. Now, what is happening today is a dispute among the trustees for a set of reasons which there are several reports about. But to be fair, the trust has actually not really brought out any clarity on what's really happening. So there is this whole executive committee of the trustee, which comprises four people, which is Noel Tata, Venu Srinivasan, Vijay Singh, and Meli Mistry. And they are essentially the representatives of the trust in terms of the trust and the trustees in terms of taking decisions with respect to Tata Sons. Noel Tata, Venu Srinivasan are on the board of Tata Sons. Vijay Singh was on the board of Tata Sons, but his reappointment to Tata Sons was not approved by the trustees and therefore he had to step down. So now essentially you have a vacancy on the Tata Sons board. So the first issue which seems to be up for debate is really who's going to get that seat, who's going to represent the trust on the board of Tata Sons. The second issue seems to be how is Tata Sons really doing capital allocation, and that seems to be something that the trust disagree with. Now, to be fair, we've seen the trust having an opinion on the Tata Group in the past as well, right? This was the whole sort of simmering background because of which you had this entire episode with Cyrus Mistry as well. And we see this now coming back again. So at one level, it is a trust trying to figure out, how do they influence some of the decisions of Tata Sons. At the other level, there is also one would call it a leadership challenge. Ratan Tata, when he came into the seat of power, faced a leadership challenge, having to deal with some of the satraps there in the group. And you now have Noel Tata, having taken over from Ratan Tata as the chair of the trust, and that itself seems to be causing a certain degree of leadership challenge. So I think that's really where it is now.
Right.
Does it impact the listed companies? It doesn't. At this stage, it doesn't. Let's put it that way. Because the listed companies are still concerned with how Tata Sons is operating because that's the holding company for them. And Chandra's got a reappointment for a third term. He continues to be continues to be chair of the of material subsidiaries of the Tata Group, the larger listed companies. So
And
that to
Tata
that
Sons
extent,
itself.
and Tata Sons itself, yes. And to that extent, I think at the operating level for the listed companies, at this stage, I don't see an impact. But we'll have to see how this entire feud sort of goes forward and what implications there are.
Right. Sriram, Talk to us a little bit about the structure itself. The foundation holding a company, which in turn is holding stakes in other companies. Now, are there similarities or parallels to this elsewhere in the world? And if so, what could we or should we be learning, if anything?
So usually in a capitalist kind of a structure, globally, there aren't many conglomerates which have this very charitable organization owns a substantial portion, which is 66% of a capitalist entity like Tata Sons and subsequently operating companies. This is a construct of about 100 years now. Of course, people like the Azim Premji Foundation in Bangalore has transferred shares to Bill and Melinda Gates, IKEA Foundation, for example. All these are entrepreneurs who subsequently transferred their shareholdings to sort of charitable entities so that they derive. Even Warren Buffett is doing that, etc. So that the fruits of capitalism flow to charitable organizations. But here in the Tata Sons and Tata Trust case, the entrepreneur is no longer there. I mean, whoever started Tata Jamshedji Tata Ji is no longer there. And the problem is now that of diffused control. Who controls really the Tata Trust? And that is where, as Hetal said, is it a fight for control of Tata Trust and in turn control of Tata Sons? That needs to be seen.
Right. Okay, Hetal. So there are two parts to this as we try and separate it. So there is Tata Trust, which was always held in a concrete and solid way. There was never any problem about lack of control or fissure within Tata Trust, which sits above Tata Sons. Tata Sons, as we know, there has been an issue because there's the Shapoorji Palonji family, which was represented by Cyrus Mistry till he passed away. And he also was chairman of Tata Sons for a while. And there have been clearly issues there, but we'll come to that in a moment. But tell us about Tata Trust itself. Is there anything that, or rather, what could have or what should have maybe caused the fissure that's we are seeing now in a somewhat public way?
So it looks like there are camps and factions, right? And that's not necessarily, if you reach a stage of being on the trusteeship or the board of, the largest group and the ultimate shareholder. I think the issues have to be beyond personal grudges and personalities, and has to be more about the issues. But I think at this stage, what's happening is it's the entire battle seems to be getting caught up in the personalities, and I think that's really where the challenge is. So Melly Mistry has been ousted from the trust, while at some point he was a close confidant of Ratan Tata, and all of these relationships are at somewhere family relationships. Melly Mistry is related to the Palanjis, there's Noel Tata and Noel Tata, Ratan Tata. So there is also this entire complicated family relationship which are also at play as an undercurrent. I think these are things which need to be addressed in a structural format. See, what's happening now is because of the personalities, there is this entire unsettled situation with the Tata Trust, and it's now all over the newspapers. And there is no clarity from the Tata Trust, something that they should sort of communicate a lot more in terms of how they're addressing some of these differences. But I think that it seems to be more of a personality and a family undercurrent which seems to be going on,
Right.
which is sort of overlaid by the fact that there is this whole concern over capital allocation and board seats at Tata Sons.
Okay, so Tata Trust owns 66% of Tata Sons. Now, Tata Sons is not a publicly listed company at this point. Now,
Yes.
what can Tata Trust do or not do if, let's say, it has problems with the way Tata Sons is functioning or any other issue?
See, it's as much as a controlling shareholder, right? In the sense that you have board representation. There used to be three board nominees on the board of Tata Sons. With Vijay Singh going out, there are two. You have board representation. Use that board representation to therefore decide how capital allocation is going to be made. I think this backseat driving and the power struggle at the back end is really what is causing a lot more of uncertainty, and this is basically unsettling for everyone. So, if there was a more harmonious relationship, I think being on the board of Tata Sons and therefore leveraging that would be a better way of handling some of these differences.
Right. And my question is, and I'll come to the capital allocation bit, that there is nothing that Tata Trust can do instantly. As in, it's not like suppose Tata Trusts own shares directly in, let's say, Tata Steel or Tata Motors or Titan. and there was it felt agreed for some reason. It could just sell the shares. In this case, there's nothing to sell and there's nothing it can do expeditiously.
No, it isn't. And I think, therefore, even if you look at Tata Trust, I looked at the annual report of the trust, right? The total disbursements in FY25 was 900 crores. It's not a very large trust. If you just look at it, TCS's own CSR spend will be more than 900 crores. And most of the other foundations will be larger. Reliance, ICICI, I'm pretty sure are going to be larger. So it's not a very large trust. I think they're living off the dividends, and that's different between dividends and CSR. They're living off the dividends of the Tata Group, and that's where they feel the crunch. But at the end of the day, there's nothing they can do expeditiously. So this seems to be more like personality clashes. There's not something they can change tomorrow. And if Tata Sons board has decided on a certain capital allocation, there has to be a rationale behind it, which is which seems to be working for the group at this point in time, at least.
Right. Okay, let's come to that. Shriram, if you want to pick up on that, so why is there an issue? And again, we've been seeing reports, so let me not list out each one of them. But why is there an issue or the discussion of capital allocation or capital raise right now?
At one end, Tata Trusts has a veto power on the board of Tata Sons. Two is some of the trustees felt that they were not privy to the decisions taken by Tata Sons, and some decisions were taken without their consent or without their information. So I think so. This goes back to faulting Mr. Ratan Tata to some extent, because Mr. Ratan Tata was not on the board of Tata Sons. Yet, this, not many commentators have said this, but Ratan Tata was endorsing most critical decisions, not just even by Tata Sons, by even the operating companies. Okay, so this issue of if some father figure whose blessing is sought for key decisions, that comes to the root of it. So why does a company like Tata Sons need to convey all its decisions to Tata Trusts or the trustees of Tata Trusts? They don't need to. As long as there is something which is defined in the Articles of Association, where anything more than 100 crore investment, any strategic partnership or strategic investment like in semiconductors, etc., those needs to be endorsed or approved by the trustees or the veto vote by Tata Sons, Tata Trust. Yeah, that is fine. But beyond that, why are you as trustees seeking specific information on the workings of Tata Sons? So that is, I think, the operating structure which had not been unresolved. And that was also one of the reasons why there was a rift between Ratan Tata and Cyrus Mistry, because Ratan Tata probably believed and that every key decision at Tata Sons needs to be blessed by him. And unfortunately, even at the time of his demise, this tension or this issue had not been resolved. And Ratan Tata should be faulted for not ensuring a smooth succession plan at Tata Trust also, because though he left a will and the successor was not appointed ahead of his demise, there was no grooming for that role, etc., etc. All these are come to the bear now.
Okay, so we're going to come back to this issue of succession and preparing for it, because this obviously comes up a lot across Indian families and Indian business families who, of course, own most of Indian business as well. Hetal, so as per Shriram, it's not the specific capital allocation issue, but the larger issue of how it was operating, which is that you had a Ratan Tata who was blessing, to use his terms, transactions or initiatives, and either that was operating in a informal or informal with a formal overlay, or formal with an informal overlay. So what should we be looking at now in the context of Tata Sons now? What are the issues at play?
So I think it worked earlier where you had common chair, right? GRD was the chair for the trust as well as the chair for Tata Sons. That worked beautifully. The minute they split that, it didn't really work very well. But in today's context,
So you have Noel Tata at the trusts and
and
Chandrasekaran
Chandra at
and Chandrasekaran now.
at Sons, right? So again, this continues that the chair of the trust is not the same as the chair of Sons. And I think markets also have evolved and governance structures and expectations are also very different now. And therefore, for us to say, for Tata Sons to be a board driven sort of company, there has to be a certain degree of acceptance about the decisions that the board make, and therefore for the trust to really have their representation on the board and use their rights as board members or as dominant shareholders is the best way going forward. I think these structures that we're seeing now, where trustees are appointed for life, you don't really allow that in listed companies, right? In listed companies, regulation itself says every 5 years you have to come up for a reappointment. So these positions for life, this whole permanency, and this battle for who's going to be on the board of Tata Sons, I think all these are distractions. The governance structures, at least at that end of the Tata Group, now needs to behave more like what you would see in listed companies, given the fact that the end goal of all of this is the fact that you're controlling a bunch of controlling a very large group, and a lot of these companies are listed. I think that's the way going forward.
And if we were to take an illustration, so let's say Tata Sons today, as you said, is one seat empty, and that's the seat that Tata Trusts could potentially nominate and had
Yes.
nominated. How could that operationally affect, let's say, one of the companies that is listed and is about to do something or is planning something?
See, I think it's as good or as bad as having an MNC, right? You have a global parent which is going to decide capital allocation for India, for an India listed entity. You look at it essentially the same structure, that you have now a parent company which is going to decide capital allocation. Based on that, you're going to make your own plans. And if you don't get enough capital from the parent, you essentially try and raise money from the market, because you're essentially a listed company and a lot of them are sort of index stocks. So to that extent, the reliance on, I mean, even if you look at the group, right, the reliance on Tata Sons has been when there was a very large need to unlock capital. If you look at the past 10 years, they've basically reduced all their cross holdings. They pumped capital into companies which were growing new businesses like Tata Motors. They pumped capital into Indian hotels. So that's the larger role of the group, to say that I'm managing the capital across the group. But a lot of these companies are standalone, large listed companies, and they can raise capital just as much as everybody else does, right? If you look at Tata Sons shareholding across the group, it's not a dominant 51 or a 75% shareholding. In most of the companies, it's actually around 35%. And therefore, for a lot of these companies, independently also, they can easily operate just like every other company does.
Okay, so within Tata Sons itself, there is another conflict of sorts because, at least there has been, because there's the Shapoorji Pallonji family with
Yes.
18%, and with some say in what goes on. Now, my question really is, why is this again brewing? I mean, what is driving the tension that we are seeing right now, at least at the Tata Sons level?
See, it's a bit unfair in terms of what's happening to the Shapoorji Pallonji group, right? They clearly are strapped for money. I think they have a problem with debt, and the Tata Sons equity is actually their most valuable asset at this point in time. But the Tata Sons isn't allowing them to pledge the shares, isn't allowing them to sell the shares, right? And isn't allowing them a both seat either. So
Hmm.
therefore, you're essentially trying to corner a material shareholder with a relationship with the family for generations, right? And I think that's a bit unfair. Tata Sons has to find an honorable exit for the Palanjis and let them and do something with that 18% equity. Either they buy over the equity at a reasonable valuation, or they get in a new partner who will buy over that equity at a reasonable valuation, or then you list and let the shares be sold. But you have to give them an exit option. I think the problem and the simmering tension continues because you're not giving them an option. They really want to exit at the end of the day.
Is there anything preventing the exit from a technical standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's the way the entire structure was formed, right? I think the intention was never for the Palanjis to exit. I don't think
Hmm.
that was baked into the initial thinking. And now that they've become a private limited company and they're creating all these sort of limitations to the Palanjis from being able to exit. They even went to court saying you can't sort of pledge the shares. I think that's where this is becoming a bit unfair in terms of treating a shareholder who wants to exit, and a material shareholder at that.
Shriram, is this your reading as well, that the core of this is really a financial problem or a issue that has to be addressed by one of the shareholders, and therefore they want a quick way out?
That's one of the dimensions for sure. Because if Shapoorji Pallonji Group, if you look back in history, it says that Shapoorji Pallonji Group actually bailed out the Tata Group at that time, right? And if it were a VCPE kind of firm, it would have structured an exit option for itself, and it would have been the largest decision maker in terms of putting a stop, having negative and positive covenants in the shareholders' agreement. Unfortunately, at that point of time, the SP Group trusted whoever was on the other side of the negotiating table. And as Hetal said, they are caught now in that sort of history. And unfortunately, the Tata Sons and the Tata Trusts are not allowing Shapoorji Pallonji a graceful exit. Okay, one way, of course, is to list Tata Sons. At least RBI is pushing for that, and so that would at least give liquidity to the shares of SP Group, and they can pledge. Or two is Tata Sons could have allowed a pledging of shares of the SP Group. Three is or buyout in some other way, or whatever it is, right? But they have completely blocked it out. And this is also probably the ego clash that happened between Ratan Tata and Cyrus Mistry, and led to this over the past 10 years, since 2016. So unfortunate as it is, SP Group, though it requires the money and the funds, is caught in this where their largest asset is illiquid, and they are not able to exit it. And so Tata's need to, that is probably their weak link. In that sense, one cannot say that they are honorable from that perspective. So to that extent, they need to work towards it. If otherwise, they will always have this black mark on their whoever the board and the trustees and everyone out there.
Right. Ethel, we have many business houses in India which have some form of holding company, and none of them are listed, or most of them are not listed. What do you feel about the concept of a holding company getting listed? And could that be also a cause of tension, that once you list a company which is the holding company, that then there is potentially that chance that you might lose control at some point, and maybe that's what's causing the friction here?
Actually, if you look at, there are a handful of companies which are holding companies and are listed. And essentially, what happens in those structures, in most instances than not,
Very
is
closely
that,
held.
well, the holding companies, if the promoters through the listed holding company are able to exercise far more control than their economic interest in the operating company. And I think that's the structure which we see. The holding companies tend to operate, of course, at a holding company discount. So we've seen these structures, holding companies are listed in India. I think as far as the Tata Group is concerned, my understanding is that Tata Sons doesn't want to be listed. They're doing everything they can to not get listed. But if they do get listed, what happens for them is that the degree of transparency required will be significantly higher. There will be far more public scrutiny of the decisions they make, which I don't think they want to subject themselves to.
And Shriram, is that something that's a natural path? Like a holding company, which, as we've now talked about, has been around for a long time. Close to a century, and then getting listed, opening up to public scrutiny. Is that a natural path, or is it something equally quite natural to resist?
No, I would think it's natural to resist for them. But because they are not providing liquidity to the SP Group, probably they need to work towards that. Or they should sort of diffuse their shareholding in the listed entities separately, and the unlisted entities somehow give some part exit to the SP Group. Otherwise, there will be that tension of Tata Sons to be pushed for listing. Even the SP Group put out a statement saying that they are pushing for the listing of Tata Sons, right?
So if I were to look at what we can learn from this for future in the context of family-run businesses, Hetal, let me start with you. So we've talked about the fact that there is obviously friction at the Tata Trust board, which has now come out into public domain. So that, I guess, is the first problem. The cause of this is potentially egos, potentially some other misunderstanding and so on, but that has now translated into a corporate situation. What is the takeaway from this from a governance point of view, even as we look at or examine other family-run businesses and family-run businesses with such similar structures?
I think, look, we see a lot of intra-promoter group disputes, right? Last year we saw several, and I think and that happens when generations change typically.
Mm.
When it's the first and second generation, you're okay because the first and second generation sort of built the businesses. When it comes to second and third, and third and fourth, that's where the uh, different agendas of individuals sort of start becoming contradicting each other. Let's put it that way. And therefore, there needs to be one just a family constitution in terms of how the equity is going to be handled. Are you going to be in management control, and who's going to be in management control? And if you're not going to be in management control, what do you do with your equity? How does it go down from generations to generation, and what is the fundamental philosophy you will have as far as the company is concerned? I think these are things which need to be sorted while the patriarch is alive or the matriarch is alive. Some of the groups have done it well. The Bajaj group has done it well.
Mm.
Heroes have done it. The Munjals have done it well, and they've managed to create the family arrangement while the matriarch and the patriarch were alive. And I think that's what's now you see as a seamless operation. But when it doesn't come to that and you don't have that clarity, I think that's where the issues sort of creep in and begin. And I think that's really where companies need or families need to focus more in terms of how they deal with the next generation. And sometimes it's about hard conversations about saying, are you really up to it or are you not up to it? Just because you belong to the family, you may not have the caliber to run the business or take it from point B to point C as much as, the initial promoter took it from point A to point B. So I think that's really some of these difficult choices that families need to make. But it's good to have that conversation when everybody's around and there's clarity and everybody accepts rather than subsequently in a will written somewhere where everybody's
But in
then
the case
disputing
of
the will.
Tata Trusts or Tata Sons, Hetal, this, I mean, literally happened a century ago. I mean, the patriarch has passed on. And I guess the question there is, how do you lay down the structure so that someone who comes 50, 60 years later, or directors who come 50, 60 years later, or the person they elect as their chairman or chairperson 50, 60 years later will be following a certain set of principles and not get into this kind of public squabble?
Yeah, it's a tough idea. See, the way to look at it again is that leadership will change or corporate culture changes or leadership changes, right?
Mm.
That we see in almost every company. And the idea, therefore, is how do you build a certain ethos in the system to ensure that there are certain do's and don'ts which will always happen. And that happens through basically building a very strong culture. What's happened now is that the operating companies have a certain Tata Group culture. Your fundamental problem now is that the trust and the Tata Sons level, that's the relationship which is
Mm.
not as smooth as it should be. And that's a function of also how the trusts have been run for a long time, right? It's been Mr. Tata or it's been a controlling patriarch which has basically run the trust. So to have a more functioning board structure per se, to be able to manage the trust agendas is what they need to sort out. So I think that governance structures of trust, despite the fact that yes, trusts have other rules and they don't have to necessarily follow what listed companies follow, but it's working well for listed companies. And the fact is that they are the ultimate shareholder of a set of very large listed companies. So they need to now operate with those kind of governance structures and mechanisms, more importantly. You have to
Right.
have process clarity and all of that.
Right, and that's the point you made at the outset as well.
Yeah.
Shriram, let me come to you. So, if you're now advising an large institutional investor in one of these companies, Tata Motors or Tata Steel, is this a matter of concern at Tata Motors level or a Tata Steel level, or is it something that you would wait to see how it pans out and then maybe start asking questions at a later stage?
No, as such, there are 26 listed operating companies. I don't think investors need to be unduly worried as of today, because even their decisions have to be because Tata Sons is just one shareholder of the many shareholders, and as Hetal said ahead, in some of these operating companies, Tata Sons owns only about 30% or 35% shareholding. So from that perspective, not all decisions are their own, I would say, this one. So what is happening at the trust level is not directly impacting the operating companies in any matter today. But if it gets very, very nasty and something happens in future which is not foreseen, obviously investors need to watch out and be aware of what is happening, but they don't need to unduly worry today.
Now, I just want to add to what Shriram was saying. I mean, at the end of the day, right, the Tata Group is known for a certain, there's a basic expectation from the brand that there is a certain governance structure, there's a certain degree of integrity of operations. But you don't, with all these instances which are coming out in public domain, it's also chipping away at the brand. And that's something that the trust also needs to recognize, that some of these things, either you provide clarity and transparency, or you have to sort of nip a lot of these in the bud. It can't get to a public level. You had this whole Cyrus Mistry issue, now you have this entire issue. So I think this is not necessarily good for a brand which is essentially known as being extremely trustworthy.
Right. And Shriram, last question. So as we, this is obviously a market which is quite vibrant. I'm talking about the capital market. As both of you say, I mean, currently we are a few layers removed from what's going on, and therefore there is no need to get worried, so to speak. But is there anything else that you should be or would be thinking about when it comes to this sort of holding company structure as we look ahead? Should people be thinking of these structures differently in future, for example? And that's really my last question.
Yeah, I think one should avoid conflicts of interest between individual members of the board or trust and the business entities. I believe that there are business interests of each of the trustees and or even some of the directors, etc. So these conflicts of interest should be totally run down to zero. Otherwise, Meli Mistry is supposed to have contracts with some of the operating companies, and those kind of things that should be nipped in the bud. I mean, on day zero, it should be, if you're a trustee, you should not have any business. Only then will people take independent decisions of independent of their business interests.
Hetal?
No, I'm with Shriram on this. I think
No, the question is really, so are these structures fine, but really the people issues that have to get resolved, including maybe some of these related party kind of transactions and so on? Or
see
is the
my
structure itself, should one question?
see my general view is that the structure is as good as it gets if the people run it efficiently. I think for the longest time when GRD Tata was around and there was this seamless, similar chair, it was running efficiently, right? And every structure that you create will create problems in terms of, no structure is perfect. Let's just put it that way. No structure is perfect. The Tata Group is a unique structure. You don't see it often, and it was created for a certain underlying philosophy of the group. I think it's a lot about how people manage it, and as Shriram says, right, that if you have a bunch of people at the trust level who are purely focused on getting the story together and figuring out what the underlying philosophy is and being issue based, I think this would run far more smoothly. What you're seeing now are undercurrents of relationships, personalities, and agendas.
Right. Hetal and Shriram, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.